we'll talk about the S scale, which is the self-reflectivity scale today. And this corresponds to the seventh element of merit, which is when you're thinking with someone about themselves, you want to join them at a level that they can participate in. And certainly this applies to Courtney's difficult patient, where we're going to think with him about termination and his reaction, but ask him to think about himself. And that's going to require Courtney to find a way to talk to him and reflect on him at a level that he can join and be a part of. And same thing also for Kane's guy, as he struggles to talk about himself at all. It's going to be beholden on Kane to sort of scaffold that at a level that matches what the patient can do. So the merit uses an adapted version of something originally called the Metacognition Assessment Scale. This is a scale that was developed by Semerari and colleagues in Rome, but it was originally meant to measure the frequency versus absences of different metacognitive acts. And we use it in a quite different way than it was originally designed. We use it as a series of hierarchical abilities, such that the S scale describes experience from the most fragmented kind of experience, like we think Kane's patient may be having, to a far more integrated sense of his self-experience. And so it basically operates like this. You're asked as a therapist to conceptualize where on the scale your patient falls. And the idea is that at the first level that he or she cannot do, then that's the ceiling. Once you can't do a certain level, it is assumed you can't do the levels above it. So in some ways, if this was like a building, once the lights are knocked out on a certain floor, all the lights above it go out. So put another way, each of these items that you see in front of you, S1 to S9, each is a metacognitive act. And to do it successfully, each act, you have to be able to do the act before it, such that once you can't do a given act, you shouldn't be able to do the others. And I'm going to try to talk through a little bit about what these look like. And I thought I would share with you a set of slides that I don't think you guys have seen before. But what it tries to do is it walks through the scale backwards. So in other words, starting at the highest level of metacognition, what is that level really describing? And so I'll use the letter S for self-reflectivity. There are, as you can see, are 9 levels. Technically, you could get a 0 on this. At the lowest levels are the greatest degrees of fragmentation. And at the higher levels, you have a rich sort of full sense of the complexity of your life. Here's an attempt to draw a picture of what it looks like if you're capable of doing the 9th level of the S scale, which would mean you can do all the levels below it. But here you have a life story. There's a picture of who you are. So if it's Tom thinking about himself, there's a story of Tom's life. There's a self in which he has there have been certain themes that have happened at time A and B in his life. And there are other themes that have happened at times D and G, and as well as other times in other areas as well. And somehow all these complicated things fit together. And that's the person who Tom is. That's who he is. And that's what someone is doing at 9. And I think we can guess that, for example, Kane's patient probably would struggle to be able to do that. He couldn't really present a bunch of different narratives, and those narratives linked in thematically. So if this was me, I might talk about myself times A and B in high school and in early adolescence as being shy in certain ways, as having certain interests. Some of those interests persist later on, but new things emerge. In college and in graduate school, there are different things happening in my life. Some of those have disappeared. Some of them have played out much more richly as I've gotten older and now in my current state of my career. And that would be true about relationships. It would be true about my personality. It would be true about the things that I care about, that I don't care about, my achievements, my failures, et cetera, et cetera. A rich picture, and that's what 9 is. The idea is that to be able to do this, you have to be able to even do one of these little boxes, like here, one of these little linked narratives at A and B. And so that's what the 8th level describes. The 8th level describes that I can see how different narrative episodes in my life are related to one another. I can see how my experiences dating a certain person in college were not terribly dissimilar to a certain shyness I had when I was in high school and engaged in a certain activity. But there's a self in narrative episode A, there's a self in narrative episode B. These are both me. and I can see how they're related. There's something about me that's stable over time. And that's what someone at 8 can do. And you can see if you have to be able to do that to get to 9. All right. But to be able to do this thing at S8, which is to see these different narrative episodes, you have to be able to even see one narrative episode where complex things are interacting. And I'm going to take the guess that Kane's patient struggles to even do that. He struggles to see a complex narrative episode in his life where thoughts and feelings are interacting. And so here's a drawing of what someone can do at 7. And again, we're going to suppose that perhaps Kane's patient really would struggle to be able to do that. He wouldn't be able to do that. And you could see that if someone couldn't do 7, you couldn't ask them to, tell me about how your thoughts and feelings interacted in a given situation, because they would have no picture of it. They would be just an outline to themselves. I think, Kane, you described your guy as a sort of a shape, but he would be a shape to himself as well. So usually when we get healthy controls and we do metacognitive research, people without severe, significant challenges, they can do this pretty reliably. Not everyone seems to be able to do S8, which is to relate different episodes to one another. But most people who, have no substantial psychiatric challenges are able to do 7. But not everyone can do 7. And to do 7, you've got to be able to do something even more minute that goes behind that. And that you have to be able to see yourself as existing in reality. And that what reality represents is not the same thing as what you needed to or wanted to. And boy, I'm sure going to guess that Courtney's guy doesn't do this. That it's really hard for him to see the world as a place where there are stark realities that have nothing to do with what he wants or how he sees it or what he needs. And that's what is. Obviously, again, our healthy controls are able to do this because we assume that this is a requirement in order to do 7. But to even do this is the 6th level. This is 6. So you can tell we're going to break it down even more minutely. To be able to even do this, to have a self, you have to see yourself as changeable or as existing dimensionally over time. And here's, again, an attempt at a drawing where there's a self at time 1, time 2, and time 3. And I can see myself across hours or days or weeks. I can see my moods changing. I can see my emotions changing. Importantly, I can see my ideas changing. My ideas are subjective and they change over time. Things I originally thought are different now than they were even, yesterday or perhaps even earlier today. That I form subjective ideas about things that are fallible and changeable, and that this extends into the future. And this is the sense of self that I need to have to be able to distinguish what's going on with me from reality. And this is in our own samples and in multiple samples internationally, people diagnosed with schizophrenia or the more severe personality disorders, it's really struggled to do this. They struggle to be able to step back and see their thoughts as changing. And so you can see why then for Kane's patient, therapy might be a challenge if he's supposed to think about his thoughts or say what they are. If it's even hard for him to really see that they change, that there's a self that's changing, that his ideas are moving around, and that what's possible again in the world, is potentially different from what he thinks. All right. So this is S5. And we think that to be able to do this, you've got to have just even within this sense, I'm pointing to my screen. I don't know why, because you can't see me point. But here, to be able to do this, you've got to have even one of these first selves to begin with. And this is a self where there are multiple things happening. There are emotions, and there are different thoughts and feelings going on. There are different mental activities, and this is S4. And the people who can't do this are folks who sometimes refer to as alexithymic. They struggle to be able to name what they think. They struggle to be able to name different emotions. And I think, certainly Courtney's guy isn't doing this either. Seems like he has one go-to, which is he's pissed off. But there's not a nuanced set of things. But Kane's patient might be able to notice thoughts or feelings. Who knows? But this is not the complex thing of, so let's talk about how you're changing over time, or yourself in reality, or what's going on in a narrative episode. This is just what's in you. What is that emotion during that time where you're surprised, during that time where you're sad? And Kane might discover his patient can't even do that, that even that is too complex for him. But perhaps emotions will emerge. And some people we've found who remind me, Kane, of your patient, when they talk about narrative episodes, sometimes emotions start to creep in and they say, yes, that was a time I was jealous. That was a time I was anxious. That was a time I was happy or confused. And they start to describe this. I think what's important here is that, and this is not a merit thing, I mean, emotions are not solid things that we detect in our bodies. In fact, the way you know your emotions is because you've put together tons of different smaller pieces of information. So if you're at a meeting and your foot is tapping and your face is warm and you're wondering what you want to drink tonight, you might put all those together and suddenly realize, my goodness, something at the meeting is making me angry. But you don't perceive something solid in your body called anger. You notice your foot is tapping. You notice the warmth in your face. You notice thoughts in your head like, boy, I hate this. So in this state, S4, different sort of things are starting to be possible in the self, including different emotions. That is a precursor to being able to do this, to see that changing over time. But it's something that some of our patients will struggle to do. And I'm going to think that Courtney's guy is also struggling to do this. And even if in determination he was able to recognize that he feels sad, that might be another emotion that he has access to. You know, I think many therapists take the stance that anyone can recognize emotions, you just have to point them out. But this is very much like the head injured person who can't see that the squares and triangles actually are a house. They only see squares and triangles. And I think some of our patients, in fact, if you keep saying, what do you feel, will finally say something so that you'll get off their back. But they'll really struggle on their own, and they do struggle on their own to have nuanced different emotions. I think, you know, we can even in our own lives think back to times when it's like, wow, I'm jealous of this. That's surprising, but you recognize it. And it itself is important. And without too much, you know, energy, you can see that, you know, as a precursor, that enables the self to be seen as changing. You can nest it in reality. You can think about a particular narrative episode. Perhaps Kane's patient is at work and he's feeling attracted to someone who is disinterested in him, and he's feeling he's not as good a worker as another man who's a little younger than him. And he could see all of that coming together. But to be able to do that again from the framework of merit, you have to be able to nest in reality, which requires a sense of self as changing, which requires this sort of sense of emotions. In terms of being able to assess how people are doing these things, I think we all do it on the fly. You do it in the moment. You ask, you listen, you inquire. Perhaps you have some idea or knowledge of the person, but you're curious. And I often, in my own assessments, begin by wondering, I wonder if this person can do S4 today. I wonder if they can notice different emotions. And I wait to see if they mention emotions. I might ask about an emotion. And I'm open to the possibility that they're going to struggle. Even if they did well at it the week before, during this week, it may be a battle for them. And ultimately, in merit, the idea of outcome is that this ability is built up through practice over time. So same idea with Courtney and the determination. She can still help her patient build these things, same as if she was meeting with them, you know, over a longer period of time. But now they'll be built around determination. So to do S4, though, since you can guess that there are three things behind it, you've got to do something too, which is before you can see these different things, you have to be able to even see that there are different things in your mind. So in my example, if my foot is tapping and my face is warm, I have to see those individual things. I have to realize there's tension in my body. I have to realize I have memories, I have thoughts. And it may be that if Kane, your guy, turns out it's really a struggle for him to name emotions, you might end up beginning by just naming the individual thoughts that come into his head in different circumstances. Perhaps if he describes a situation at work, you say, what thought came into your head? Or was there a feeling in your body? Maybe if he says, I was tense, you might wonder, where were you tense? How long were you tense? You have an idea when the tension went away. So here we have a much more elemental set of reflections at S3. And this is appropriate for people who can't do S4. And I think we think of metacognitive capacity, which is what this is purporting to measure, as an ability that's perhaps a lot like blood pressure in that it tends to be about the same level, but it can go up or down given certain circumstances. If you have chronically high blood pressure and you exercise and take medication, it can lower. But people, may gain or lose within sessions or across sessions. So this is S3. In our sample, generally people diagnosed with schizophrenia are between a 3 and a 4, sometimes a little bit higher than a 4, but just about there. But to be able to even do this, you still have to be able to do something, which is you have to even have a self to begin with. And I think since we all work with patients with profound psychosis, we have known people where the most they can do is know that they have a mind. They're not sure what's in it, but they know that at least they think something's happening in their mind. If this fails, then we have people who just sort of know the world and there almost is no self. There's no clear boundary. It's unclear what's going on in me or in someone else. And this is the person who's probably profoundly psychotic, and they won't be able to identify a thought or a feeling, but will merely know that things are changing and moving around in and outside of them in a way that's boundary and porous.
We have just listened to Paul talk about an important component of merit. Merit focuses specifically on the narratives or the personal stories of the patient, and certainly in our group on the stories of the therapists. As a rule, we often ask patients for their stories because we want abstractions or general ideas about events in their lives, which also applies to supervision and the experience of the supervisee and the story he or she brings, in this case, to Paul for thinking together about the patient. Finally, eliciting narrative episodes often requires therapist action and should be pursued with the goal of understanding what events actually happened, and similarly, supervision requires thinking together about the therapist's experience with the patient. With this in mind, and my own experience is just how grateful we were to have learned so much from Paul over the Saturday morning sessions.